Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Now today, I'm excited to be speaking with Dr. Nicole Gabana. Nicole, welcome to the Sports Psych Show.
Thank you so much, Dan. I'm excited to be here.
I'm really pleased to have you on it. Looking forward to having a really good chat today. But I think to get us started, why don't you introduce yourself to the Sports Psych Show audience?
Great, I'd be happy to. Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole, and I am the Director of Sports Psychology for the University of Massachusetts Athletic Department. I am a licensed psychologist, and I am also a certified mental performance consultant, and I enjoy working with athletes and high performers to enhance their mental health and well-being and also enhance their mental performance in sport and in all areas of their life, really.
How long have you been at Massachusetts for?
This is actually my first year at Massachusetts.
Oh, wow.
Prior to this, I was in a different role down at Florida State University, where I was serving as an assistant professor of sports psychology and doing more research, teaching, supervision of our graduate students down there. So now I'm in more of a full-time practice role, which has been really fun in terms of the transition. Definitely an interesting time to take a new job in the midst of a global pandemic, but I've really enjoyed my time at UMass so far.
Well, it's interesting. So I intended to ask you what a day in the life of your profession looks like, but I suppose you've joined at a time where everything is so different. I mean, have you had the opportunity to have much interaction with the student athletes?
Yeah, it has been quite interesting. So I never could have imagined the climate or the environment that I would be walking into. I accepted the position before COVID hit in early March of 2020. So I didn't expect to be doing a lot of virtual work when I accepted the new position, but that has been a lot of the nature of coming into this role. Fortunately, our athletic department has been great in just trying to maintain contact and relationships, and we've been adapting to the new circumstances. So a lot of my meetings are virtual now, but I do occasionally see athletes and teams in person. We've had a couple teams on campus this past fall, and we're planning to bring more of our athletes back for the spring semester. So I love working with people in person, so it's been hard to be virtual all the time, but our athletes have also been great, and our teams and coaches have been great about adapting to less than ideal circumstances. So we're trying to work with what we have right now.
When you were at Florida, you were researching, you were teaching. Did you have a real yearning to really just do client-facing work, student-athlete work?
Yes, definitely. I actually took the faculty position unexpectedly. I was planning to go into a full-time practitioner role when I left grad school, when I graduated. And at the time, this opportunity was presented, and I interviewed and just fell in love with the program. And it just felt like the right fit for me at the time. And it was such an awesome experience. And I had the opportunity to work with some amazing students and colleagues. So there was always this part of me, though, that really missed working with athletes hands-on and doing that work full-time. I still continued to see clients on the side and work part-time as a consultant and mental health professional. But I was really just after 3 years just itching to get back into practice. So that's one of the reasons why I transitioned into this type of role.
How many athletes, how many teams are you taking care of there in Massachusetts?
We have about 650 or so athletes. So
Wow.
it's quite the athletic department, and I would say for Division I athletics, this is pretty typical. You know, things range from a little bit smaller to larger, but this is the first full-time sports psychologist position that they have had in the athletic department. So it's been a nice opportunity to come in and kind of build a program from scratch. They had a couple professionals that were doing part-time consulting work and were fulfilling those needs before, but it's really nice to have someone in house now, and it's definitely a responsibility that I don't take lightly. And it's been really fun to get to know everyone, not only the athletes, but just the staff and our coaches and support staff as well.
That's so cool. So you've got this opportunity, this blank sheet of paper to be able to draw out a new department, a bunch of processes across a bunch of teams. I mean, when you arrived, because the college hadn't had as much interaction with sports psychologists as, say, perhaps other colleges may have done, did
Mm-hmm.
you find not so much pushback, but or cynicism, but a bit of skepticism? Try to prove your worth, essentially.
Mm-hmm. I think there's always a little bit of that just by nature of what we do in sports
Mm,
psychology, because it's a relatively newer field, and some people aren't as familiar with it, or they might have had an experience that hasn't gone well in the past. So I think there's always a little bit of that wherever you are. But luckily, my athletic department, our coaching staff, our support staff, they've really been nothing but wonderful. And so I felt very blessed coming into this type of culture and environment where from day one, I really felt supported in, promoting this message that athlete mental health is part of physical health. And if we really want to take care of our student athletes' well being and put them in the best position to perform at their best, that mental health and well being is an essential component of that. The support that we're able to offer our athletes, just like we have strength and conditioning and athletic training and academic support. And um, so I've felt very fortunate that I didn't feel that I had to, really prove my worth or change a lot of people's minds about it, because I would say our coaches and staff here are pretty progressive as it is in terms of treating our student athletes
yeah.
holistically.
Historically, as a sports psychologist, have you oriented perhaps more towards the well-being and mental health piece more so than the performance piece, or bits of every branch of sports psychology?
Hmm. I would say I'm a hybrid. So I
Okay.
really love the mental health side of things. I am a counseling psychologist, so the reason that I chose that educational and career path is because at the end of the day, I love working with individuals who want to better themselves, who want to grow in their understanding of themselves. And when that's in the realm of performance, it's really cool. And that's where my passion lies, is working with athletes, with high performers to just maximize their potential. But I don't see that as stopping at the sport arena. I think that can go beyond into the realm of like just their general life, their relationships, what they want to do after their sport career. Has shifted, or they've transitioned out of competitive sport. So I love being able to do the general work as well and focus on mental health. And I think oftentimes when we're helping people reach peak performance, a lot of those conversations about well-being and how you're managing stress and how you're communicating and how you deal with pressure, and there's just so much connection to that individual's belief system, their experiences, their relationships. And so I get a lot of rich information when I'm able to merge those two domains. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
Absolutely did. Absolutely did. I mean, I completely agree. Now, heading back to Florida, you were doing a lot of research. What was the majority of your research in? Was it quite well-being oriented?
so I would say if I had to describe the umbrella of my research, it would be student athlete mental health and well-being, But the implications of that were not just limited to, when we think of in terms of mental health or psychological well-being, it feels very personal, it feels very general. But I also try to incorporate performance related variables as well. So it's not always easy to measure direct correlates or to performance, markers, but we can look at things like team cohesion, communication, resilience, the relationship between an athlete and their coach. So I wanted to keep the work that I was doing within this umbrella of well-being and performance. So I didn't want to pigeonhole myself into either or. So that would be the broad umbrella, and then within that, I started to look at the positive psychology literature, which I don't know if it would be helpful for me to expand on that a little bit.
Yep, no, please do.
So I always like to expand on this just because I think when we hear the term positive psychology, like everybody has this immediate association with like, just think positive, right? Just be positive. And I have to laugh because it's completely understandable because that's the first thing you think of when you hear it. But in terms of positive psychology as a field, it arose out of or I should say, in response to kind of this traditional study of psychology from a medical model or from a psychopathology model that looked at what happens when things go wrong and more of about disorders, mental disorders, and how we can bring things back up to baseline, which is really important to talk about. It's really important to study, and it helps us address a lot of issues, a lot of concerns from that medical model. But in the 1990s, positive psychology came about because there were researchers at the time, Dr. Marty Seligman, who is often known as the father of positive psychology. Um, these researchers started to look at what happens when things go well. Like, yes, it's important to study what happens when things go wrong and how do we fix that, but we're also missing half of the information if we're not studying information about when we have thriving performance, when we have flourishing relationships, when we have communities who are really connected. When people are feeling their best, what is going on in that relationship, in that dynamic, to increase those odds of good outcomes happening. So I got interested in this field of positive psychology after being thrown into teaching a positive psych course when I was a PhD student at Indiana University. And it was one of those happy accidents that I didn't know anything about positive psych. I was just interested in sports psychology and working with athletes. And the more I started to learn about this field and these concepts like learned optimism and gratitude and spirituality and how these things were being studied, hope, um, it dawned on me that like this field of studying flourishing human potential merges so well with our field of sports psychology, which looks at optimal performance and optimal performance potential. So for me, it just felt like a natural fit. So I started to pursue that line of research within my sports psych work.
I think it's so relevant, Nicole, and I'd be interested to get your thoughts on this. I think it's so relevant for coaches and the coaching environment because coaching environments tend to be so deficit driven. We're
Mm-hmm.
always, or often, I should say, oriented towards what's not working,
Right.
what needs fixing, what needs improving, what's not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And look, clearly we live in a world where, in a world of excellence, of high performance, we've got to have some of that. There's no doubt about that.
Mm-hmm.
But we're so engulfed in that philosophy, if you like, that I think it can become overwhelming, both not just for athletes, but also for coaches. And I think the study of thriving, the study of flourishing, the study of what works, what's good, I just think it's just automatically just saying it, even Nicole, it's just empowering. It's just like,
Hmm.
yeah, great, right, what is working right now, what is good. it's
Hmm.
it's it's just automatically makes you feel better. That probably sounds quite cheesy and quite fluffy, but I think it does. I really
Yeah,
do. What's your thoughts?
I couldn't agree more. And to be honest, I wouldn't be doing this work or pursuing this line of research if I didn't see it happen first in action. And I really felt the impact of this work when I was working under my one of my graduate mentors when I was in grad school, Dr. Joel Wong, and he was the one who designed the positive psych course that I was starting to teach. And at the time, he was researching the impact of gratitude interventions on therapy outcomes and also on the brain. And so he really gave me this opportunity to learn more about these positive psych concepts. But what really made the biggest impact on me was the way that he treated me as a mentor. And the questions he asked about my strengths, or the feedback he gave me that was so encouraging, that was almost like believing in me before I fully had that skill set, that it really propelled me forward to thinking like, oh, I can do this, or here are my strengths and how can I use them in my career, how can I use them in a new way. I can't emphasize enough like the power that that has when combined with the the things that we need to improve and the things that we need to work on to get better. Like you said, that's extremely important in sport. Like if you're not focused on how to get better, then you're not really having a competitive mindset. But that needs to be coupled with a strengths based, encouraging, empowering attitude and action. And I think it's so relevant for coaches, like you said.
As you were speaking there, I wrote down three things with relation to the relationship you had with your mentor. Language matters. I wrote down feedback protocols. Everything we're going to talk about
Mm-hmm.
today, matters to how coaches feedback to players. I wrote down coach-athlete relationships. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's so important. Before you mentioned a word, gratitude, and we're going to talk more about that. In fact, that's going to be our main topic today. But before we start talking about that, just to dwell a little bit on positive psychology, Martin Seligman. Um, One of the things I've always drawn upon from Martin Seligman, his work, this notion, he always talks about this notion that we tend as human beings to have a negative brain. I've written about this quite a lot. He's related it to evolutionary psychology, how to be able to survive several hundred
Mm-hmm.
thousand years ago. As human beings, our attention had to be oriented towards threats, and over time we've kept that same kind of orientation, so we tend to have our brain tends to be like velcro for negatives and Teflon for positives, pushing
Yep.
positives away and bring me more negatives. It's certainly something that I really do think that we're I believe, and certainly my experiences within my practice, my consultancy practice, is that people, not just athletes, of course, but people tend to orient towards the negative. It's just the natural thing to do. Our brains are negative.
Yeah, it's funny because I was just speaking with a client about this morning with one of my student athletes, and she was interested in developing more of a gratitude practice because she had heard one of my former podcasts and was asking me about it. And she noticed that she's like, I just tend to get stuck on that one negative thing that, and we talked about how like there can be 9 positive things that you hear, and it's that one negative or that one constructive comment that you just can't stop thinking about. And I think once we learn that our brain does have a tendency toward the negative, it allows us to not beat ourselves up for often feeling that way. Like there's a lot of benefits of having a negative brain too, because as an athlete, as a competitive athlete, as a high performer, it allows you to continue to grow and improve and strive for excellence. So it's not inherently a bad thing. It's just a matter of if we're not keeping that in check, or if we're not balancing it out with intentionally noticing the good things and intentionally noticing our strengths and encouraging ourselves to be better in a positive way rather than a chastising way or a punishing way, then we're missing the big picture. And sooner or later, we're going to feel down on ourselves. We're going to get discouraged. We're going to feel like we're not good enough. And when we start to feel that way, we see effort decrease, we see motivation decrease. And so it's not about either or, like the negative or the positive. It's about having a balance of both and knowing when you need to check yourself so that you're not letting that negativity spiral or just keep you stuck in this unproductive space.
Absolutely. You mentioned, or at least alluded to, a ratio there, and we've mentioned the name of Martin Seligman, but another big name in the world of positive psychology is Dr. Barbara Fredrickson.
Mm-hmm.
And she has a theory that she's created, broaden and build theory of positive emotion. She talks about a ratio of positives to negatives. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'd love to. So, Dr. Fredrickson, she has this theory of broaden and build theory, which is basically based on the premise that when we experience positive emotion, it helps us broaden our perspective. So, oftentimes, and you can think about this in your own life, like when you experience positive emotion, you feel happy, you feel excited, you feel energized, you feel uh, just connected. It tends to make us more creative. Like we're able to see more creative solutions. We have more energy. We have more ideas. And there's a lot of research on creativity that I'm just starting to get into now. That's really fascinating. So that's one way that positive emotion can impact us by broadening our perspective, and it also helps us to build on our resources, to see the support that's available to us, to encourage us to reach out for help or to draw on, the things that we have available to us to problem solve, to make decisions. We're not so confined to this narrow minded perspective that, it's so focused on the negative or so narrowly focused. It helps us to broaden and build our the relationship between our thoughts and our actions, essentially. And she talks about this positivity ratio. And I know Dr. John Gottman, who is a researcher in relationships and flourishing relationships, and he has a lot of great work with couples. He talks about something similar too, that you should be sharing. I want to say it's 3-1 or 5-1. I forget which one is Dr. Fredrickson and Dr. Gottman, but
I
um,
think Fredrickson's 3-1, isn't she? I think.
okay, so maybe the relationship one I'm thinking of is 5-1. But
Yep.
basically, we need to be balancing our our positivity 3 to every 1 negative. So, for example, if we're giving feedback to someone, it can be helpful to, comment on 3 things that they're doing well, or to emphasize their strengths alongside of a constructive comment.
I think it's fascinating, and it certainly has repercussions for how coaches communicate with players. And by the way, my thought on 3-1, I think Barbara Fredrickson is 3-1. Nicole, I'm not 100% sure. I must be honest.
Yeah, I'm. It sounds right to me. I know that there's been a mix of both, but basically that the impact of the negative, since our brain automatically tends to default to that negativity bias, that we need strategies, we need skills to help us not only balance that out within ourselves when it comes to the thoughts we have about ourselves, about our capabilities, our skills, our performance, but also the way that we communicate to others, whether it's our athletes, our mentees, our students, our loved ones. There's just so much in terms of implications for just human relationships in general. And um, so, yeah, I encourage people to look into, Dr. Fredrickson's work, and Dr. Gottman's work is very, very fascinating as well.
Well, interestingly, and we're going to come on and talk about some of your work, a chapter you've written and some research papers you've done, but actually picking from the chapter, I'll just read here, in a meta-analysis of nearly 300 empirical studies on positive affect. So positive affect being feeling, so positive feeling. Researchers found that positivity is not only related to success in life, but it also predicts it. Therefore, it's not enough to say that successful people happen to experience more positive emotion, but rather that experiencing positive emotion can, in fact, lead to greater success. So it feels like the empirical evidence suggests that there's a real strong relationship there between positive affect, positive feelings, and success, however that's defined.
Yeah. And, I'll go back to thinking about your own personal experiences, whether that's in a relationship with someone, in an interaction, in, a performance situation. When you're feeling good, it makes you want to do more. Like it makes you want to work harder. It makes you want to invest more. It makes you want to push yourself. It makes you excited, energized. And I think that going back to the 3-1 ratio with Dr. Fredrickson's work, when we can make people feel empowered and we can encourage them and tell them that we're proud of them and highlight their strengths, I think that people feel more valued, they feel more appreciated, and they want to do better. They know that you believe in them, and they start to believe in themselves more, and it does transfer into action, into hard work and work ethic. Now, that being said, I want to be careful that we don't set the expectation either that we are going to feel good all the time. The positive affect is nice when it happens, and there are ways that we can increase the chances of feeling positive emotion. But we also get in trouble if we expect ourselves to feel positive emotions all the time. The other side of that is learning how to deal with negative emotion so that we're not just like freaking out every time we feel like a negative emotion and then getting down on ourselves for feeling that way. Because that's just a normal part of the human experience. And if we don't know how to deal with negative emotions and normalize them, especially in the context of sport, then the false positivity can actually be counterproductive at times as well.
It's really interesting you say that, because I'm going to draw on my interest in personality, and I suppose I'm going to slightly draw on my own experience as well. And I'd just love to get your thoughts, your comment on what I'm about to say. So my understanding from the personality literature is akin to pretty much what you've said, which is if we've got positive emotion and we've got negative emotion, they are actually not on the same continuum. And if we were to use terms from personality science, negative emotion would be neuroticism. Horrible term. We'll put that one to the side and just use the term negative emotion. And positive emotion would actually be related to extroversion, the extroversion introversion dimension, and that's not necessarily something that a lot of people would necessarily either know or would equate positive emotion to extroversion. But I'm quite an introverted person, and I would say by I mean I'm a happy person in life, but I would also say I don't necessarily experience an overwhelm of positive emotion. Won't necessarily express this enormous positive emotion that some people do, who might be described as real, who might report themselves as extroverts. Um, Equally, I don't think I experienced a lot of negative emotion. Now, I did as a professional golfer, and this is the interesting thing, Nicole, is that
Mm-hmm.
actually professional sports, elite adult sport,
Mm-hmm.
turned up the volume of neuroticism, turned up the volume of negative emotion for me. It didn't do much for my positive emotion. That stayed pretty constant, and it usually does. But with negative emotion, I think that what people don't realize is you can experience a range of positive emotion and a range of negative emotion, but they're not necessarily on the same continuum. And I think that's important to understand, perhaps.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting point. And I'm curious, since you mentioned your experience of negative emotion when you got to that level, did you feel like the negative emotion was amplified because of the level at which you were competing? Was it like a with more pressure there came more consequence or expectation of the outcome, and that I'm just
Yeah,
interested or curious about like that
very much so.
change you experienced.
Yeah, very much so. I mean,
Yeah.
it related to a whole host of things that we've spoken about on the Sports Site show the last few months. My relationship with competitiveness, my relationship with performance, with what golf meant to me in my life, what I thought I had to do or be as a competitor,
Hmm.
the intensity I thought I had to adopt, the all or nothing attitude I felt I had to adopt, things that you and I will experience
Hmm.
every single day in our practice when talking
Hmm.
with people, with players. So 100%, the volume of, we'll call it negative emotion, turned up because of the narrative, the inner story I had in and around, you know, my perceptions of who I had to be and how I had to go about what I do. And let's draw some relationship with what we're talking about today. Man, the volume of gratitude, the volume of reflecting on strengths and things that are good and things that that are thriving and flourishing for me. There was very, very little narrative there, and I'm relating this
Hmm.
because I'm not a unique story, because this is so rife in adult elite sport,
Hmm.
developing elite sport, college sport, etc., etc.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you sharing your personal perspective and experience because even though it's anecdotal, like you said, it's not unique. Like I've heard that with athletes that I've worked with too, and I see that just in how things play out in elite sport. And as you increase the competitive level, there is more pressure, there's more expectation, there's more riding on the outcome. And I love that you use the word narrative because I think that's so, that type of narrative work is so important to look at and really examine when we're looking at the impact of our thoughts and on our emotions and our behavior. But I think that's why this work, this investment in cultivating a gratitude habit is so important to me because the the higher you get in terms of the performance realm, the more you need it because there is so much pressure and there is so much, you're trying to improve that 1%, which can be really taxing. And if we're not maintaining some perspective, if we're not actively intentionally looking for the good, then by default we're going to zoom in on all of the negative, on all of the things that need to be improved, or when we don't get what we wanted, or we don't get that outcome.
Well, you've offered a neat segue there onto talking about gratitude and away from my professional golf woes. So thank you very much for that. Um, and I love what you said there, cultivating a gratitude habit. Fantastic. And I know that you're one of the foremost researchers in this area globally. So can you define gratitude for us? What do you mean by gratitude? And after defining it, can you tell us a little bit about, well, is that a state? Is that a trait? Is that in the moment? Tell me a bit more about gratitude.
Yes, I would love to. And there are a lot of different definitions of gratitude out there, in the lay arena, in the academic world. When I talk about gratitude, I generally think of acknowledging a benefit that you have been given, that has been either bestowed on you by someone else, by a higher power, by your circumstances. It's acknowledging a benefit that has made some impact on you in a positive way. And oftentimes there's this recognition that you didn't necessarily do anything to deserve that. And that's not to say that you can't be grateful for things that you do deserve, but it's kind of this recognition that there are things that are being given to you. Um, and so gratitude can be a state. It can be like something that we feel in the emotional sense. So we've all had experiences where we kind of feel that warm and fuzzy emotion of gratitude, where you're just so overwhelmed with gratefulness for your blessings or for someone in your life or an experience. So it can be an emotional state. And gratitude can also be a trait. And in that sense, it's more of a dispositional trait. So we know from the literature that, some people may score higher on dispositional gratitude as a personality trait than others. But what's really cool about the research on gratitude is that with certain personality traits, they tend to be more stable. Like you already mentioned neuroticism and extroversion. With gratitude, I was actually part of a study where we looked at the impact of gratitude interventions on the brain, and we found that over time, with practice, with building a habit of gratitude, it actually increases the neuroplasticity in our brain, and that the trait can be more malleable than we might expect. So it's not that you're just a grateful person or you're not. It's that with time, with practice, and really developing a habit of gratitude, that you can change your disposition. And I relate this to some of Dr. Seligman's work on learned optimism. We can also learn gratitude. And so I often describe gratitude as, we already talked about it being an emotion, but it can also be a thought. So something that I tell my athletes is that you don't have to feel grateful to practice gratitude. And I know on the surface it sounds like, what? But I say that because sometimes we expect ourselves to feel a certain way in order to act a certain way. But we know that, in sport, you're not always going to feel motivated to train. You're not always going to feel motivated to do something. The same way, you're not always going to feel grateful for something. But what you can do is you can build a habit into your daily routine where you practice identifying good things, even if you don't feel the emotion in an intense way. So I really like to make that distinction because I think that's a key part of developing a habit. It's really about consistency, and we know the importance of consistency and routine in the context of sport and elite performance. And so that's the way that I see gratitude as a mental skill, because you're practicing something that over time makes you better and better at shifting your perspective in the moment and seeing the bigger picture.
That's really interesting, Nicole, because that almost comes back to my self analysis, and from your definition there, um, gratitude can solely have a cognitive dimension, and that can positively impact my behaviors. I don't necessarily have to have an affect, an emotional response to the language of gratitude. It's just the very process of being grateful, expressing gratitude, building a habit of gratitude can actually have a positive knock-on effect in terms of my behaviors. Am I understanding you correctly there?
Yes. And I would just to add to that, I would say that increasing positive affect or those emotions, those positive emotions, is not the only aim or benefit of practicing gratitude. So it's one of them, it's one of the outcomes that we see in the research, but there's a lot of interpersonal benefits that we see. And going back to your lived experience, we've all had times when, if we verbally or in written form express gratitude to someone, usually there's some reciprocity there where they also share or express some gratitude, or they share their feelings. And we see that gratitude expression tends to strengthen social bonds and interpersonal connections. And oftentimes we experience gratefulness for certain people or certain experiences, but we don't always say it. And so that's where just another applied implication is that for coaches, for athletes, to actually tell people and express their gratitude in words, whether that's telling them to their face verbally, whether it's writing a letter of gratitude or sending an email or a text. But that can be a really powerful tool in strengthening relationships, in building team cohesion. So there's a lot of social benefits as well, in addition to the personal benefits of gratitude.
I think what you said there is really interesting. What I took from that is, let's take a coach who's perhaps doesn't experience. Again, I'm going to come back to this. You mentioned that term, lived experience, who doesn't necessarily experience a great deal of affect or emotion from a positive standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
That coach can actually benefit from expressing gratitude verbally with a player or players, even though he or she, that coach, isn't necessarily experiencing the gratitude internally. Actually, the benefit derived is an improved coach-athlete relationship, because that coach is saying, "Well, I'm really grateful that you're doing this, this, and this, or I'm really grateful for your presence here because of this, this, and this."
Mm-hmm.
Research has suggested that can improve a bonding, improve coach-athlete relationships. So the coach, him or herself, might not necessarily experience the gratitude within, but it's useful for them to express that gratitude to be able to improve those relationships.
Yes, and the part that I want to highlight of what you just said is, you said when coaches express gratitude for this, this, and this, and we value because of, that word because is so important. And I'll relate this back to feedback, performance feedback. We know that feedback is most effective when it's concrete and specific. So, when you say good game to one of your players, it, might have this positive hit in the moment of like boosting confidence in that instant. But to say something specifically and concretely about what that person did well, it's going to give them more information about what you want to see happen in the future. So the same goes for gratitude. If coaches are just saying, "I'm so grateful for you guys," right? That's going to be much less impactful than if you take the time as a coach to sit down and make a list of, okay, these are this player's top 3 strengths that I value about them. And here's one specific example in practice this past week where I saw them exemplify this strength. And I appreciate this player because of these things, and I'm going to share that information, that feedback with my player so that they know that I value them for these specific reasons. Not just saying like blanketly, I appreciate you, because after a while, if you just keep saying that and it's not specific, it's not tailored to that individual, the words lose their meaning. They lose their gravity, and people can kind of see through that, I think. So it needs to be genuine, it needs to be specific, and it often takes like time, and effort, intention to actually sit down and express gratitude in a deeper way.
Interesting. And I'm putting myself in the shoes of the coach, and I'm thinking, so gratitude isn't just feeling; it's thinking. It's language.
Mm-hmm.
I just think I don't want to dwell too much on it, but I do think that so important, because I think some, coaches, having been a coach myself, you can work off emotion, you can work off feeling, because emotion and feeling is so meaningful to you, and you don't necessarily, your behaviors engage with your emotion and your feeling. You do things based on emotion and feeling, because they're experienced so deeply. Whereas gratitude as a tool, I might not feel uh, this, but I'm going to say this because I know it to be true. It's quite cognitive, but it's going to improve that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to give me the opportunity to provide real good, specific, practical feedback. Yeah, okay, I see that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of like the idea of love, right? Like you don't when you love someone, you don't always feel that you're 100% in love with them in that moment. Like there's times when you get frustrated, there's times when you are annoyed, but you know it to be true. And so I think it's really important to distinguish between the difference between feeling the emotion of gratitude and practicing gratitude as a habit or as a virtue, um, or as a thought, like you said, being able to cognitively know that you are grateful and you appreciate because of these things.
Really interesting. From your research, what other relationships are there between gratitude and performance in sport, or experience in sport for athletes?
Yeah. So we've seen in the research with college student athletes that athletes who tend to feel more grateful also have lower levels of athlete burnout. They also have higher rates of sport satisfaction, um, and higher, lower rates of psychological distress. So we know that there's a relationship between gratitude and some of those sport related variables. There's also been some studies with the relationship between gratitude and more positive coach athlete relationships. Um, Jeff Rooser, who is a PhD student at Indiana University, has been doing some work on gratitude in athletes as well. And we've also started to see in some of the initial intervention studies with gratitude interventions. And what I mean by that are basically programs or sessions where the goal is to enhance gratitude or cultivate gratitude habits with athletes. And we see that after some of these programs, athletes are exhibiting more positive coach athlete relationships. They're exhibiting better mental health scores, higher levels of resilience, improved team cohesion. And so these are just initial findings. There's still a lot of empirical data that need to be collected to substantiate these initial findings. So we've just started looking from a research perspective on the impact of gratitude interventions. But speaking again anecdotally and from my experience working with clients and student athletes, I've just seen firsthand the impact that some of these practices can have on not only the athletes, but also the coaches. And I often talk with coaches about the importance of them cultivating their own gratitude habit. Another thing that we try not to do is like force people to be grateful or preach that like you should be grateful for something. Like I think gratitude is best exemplified through practice and through modeling behavior. So I would encourage coaches to build that skill for yourself and see the impact that it has on you and be a model to your athletes. Don't just expect your athletes to be more grateful or, to make them increase their gratitude. And you'll see that it's challenging to do at times. And I know there's a lot of wonderful coaches already practicing and preaching this. So it's really exciting to see just this take off in terms of the academic research, but also in practice with positive coaching and sports psychology.
Last two questions. Firstly, you've talked about coaches there. You've given us a couple of ideas, but what other ideas are there out there for coaches to build that gratitude habit? What can they do practically to be able to experience a greater sense of gratitude?
One of the easy ways to practice this, and this is based on the research of, again, Dr. Seligman, is writing down 3 good things that you can acknowledge each day. And people prefer to do this at different times in the day. Sometimes I like to do it in the morning about the previous day, or some people enjoy doing it in the evening before they go to bed. I've also heard people practice having conversations at the dinner table about what they felt grateful for that day, with their kids or their partner. And so just finding an opportunity to either write it down, have a conversation about it, and beyond just writing down 3 things that were good that happened, writing why. So the because part, this, I am grateful for this because it impacted me in this way, or it helped me in this way, or it made this part of my life easier. So the more that we can reflect on the why, the deeper the gratitude roots grow when we practice that habit. So whether it's keeping a journal or, a note in your phone, setting a timer to remind yourself to do it, that's an easy way to practice that. And then going back to the example I gave before, taking the time to sit down and make a list of the things that you feel grateful for each player, sharing that feedback with them. And then also like finding ways to build it in your culture. So can you take a minute at the end of practice to create space for your players to express gratitude to one another for something specific that one of their teammates did in practice that day? So creating opportunities to put that into action and to really build a culture of gratitude, I think those are some practical ways where coaches can get started with that habit.
And I think you've kind of answered what would be my second question, which is how can coaches help players to develop a habit of gratitude? Is there, when you've worked with coaches to help players, is there anything else there that they can do?
I would say, just challenging players to identify the good in their own performance too. Oftentimes when we think about gratitude, we think, I'm grateful for someone else. I'm grateful for this thing that was given to me. And it's more of this external focus. But one of the things that I often talk about when I do gratitude workshops with athletes is intrapersonal gratitude. How can you be grateful to yourself for your strengths, your abilities, how you've persevered during tough times? And I don't have any research on this yet, but I could see, this having an impact on an athlete's self-esteem, their self-confidence, their self-efficacy. And so if coaches can encourage players to practice identifying the good within themselves and not just, providing that external feedback that's good, then we can get athletes in the habit of noticing the good within themselves so that it's balancing out that negativity bias internally.
Holding your own appreciative inquiry I suppose, holding your own appreciative inquiry.
Yeah, I like that. I like that.
Yeah, good stuff. Nicole, fantastic. Really, really interesting. And I definitely think it's something that would have sparked an interest in the coaches listening in. And I'm sure they'd like to have a read of the research that's out there and some of the stuff that's available, and also have the opportunity to ask any questions if you're available to answer. How can people get in contact with you?
Sure. I am on Twitter. My Twitter handle is at Dr. Nicole Gabana, DrNicoleGabana. And I'm always happy to hear from people and answer questions. So thank you so much for this opportunity, Dan. It's been really awesome to have this conversation with you.
Well, no, thank you so much. And I really, really enjoyed that conversation, Nicole. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much. Fun.
Well, everyone, I really enjoyed that podcast and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, thinks. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the Sports Psych Show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.